Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a 3 looks 1 palette video using the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. About a month ago now I posted a poll on my community tab. Make sure you are checking my community tab if you're not already, because I love putting polls up there to get your feedback on the kinds of videos that you would like to see from me. But I asked which of 4 Natasha Denona palettes that I have in my collection you all would like to see the most in a 3 looks 1 palette video, and Metropolis won. Thank you to everyone who voted in the poll. I hope this video will give you some inspiration for looks, and also stay tuned to the end of the video to hear my overall thoughts on this palette. If you would like to see my 3 looks, including the one that I'm wearing on my eyes now, just keep on watching. Alright, so I have a feeling that most of you probably know what the inside of the Metropolis palette looks like, but there's a lot of different ways to go in terms of color. There's some oranges, this nice red down here, there's lots of golds, greens, blues, and then some more neutrally brown or more warm brown tones. I'm not going to swatch every color in the palette for you because I'm sure you've probably seen that in other videos using this palette before, but I might just swatch a few here and there to help me figure out what kind of a look I want to do. Right off the bat, I am being very drawn to the blues in the palette. So there's this blue shimmer and this blue shimmer, and this one looks slightly more green. So here are those 2 shimmers swatched out. They are so beautiful. This one is definitely more of a bright blue, and then this one is more of a green. You can really see the color difference better in a swatch rather than in the pan. Both of the mattes that I'm looking at are cream to powder, which is a formula that I have struggled with in the past from Natasha Denona, but I will try again today to see if I can get to grips with it a little bit better. So I'm thinking of this one here and this one here. So let's see how those 2 compare. So again, this one's more of a true blue and this one's more of a tealy green. So both of those shimmers have kind of like a corresponding cream to powder that goes along with it perfectly. So I've zoomed you in a bit, and I think I don't really know exactly how to start, so I think I'm just going to start the best way I know how, which is with a neutral through the crease. So I'm going to take this shade here, which is called Rope, and I'm going to put that through my crease to just start off the look. This shade is almost like a mustardy brown, so not a true neutral, but most of the tan beigey browns in this palette lean quite warm, which is honestly fine. A neutral crease goes with any color eye look. It just helps to ground the look a little bit, and this is definitely like an earthy palette, so I feel like all the colors will work well together in the end. And that just gives us a little bit of contouring through that crease to start the shape of the eye look. I think I'm going to try to combine the teals and blues together. So I'm going to go in with that more teal of the 2 cream to powder shades. This one here called Symbol. So I'm just applying this lightly to add a bit of teal to the crease. As I mentioned, I've used Natasha Denona's cream to powder formula in other palettes, and I've struggled a bit with it, but I find it tends to work best for me as like a shadow liner kind of a product, especially the one in the Biba palette, which is a black, so it's perfect for that purpose. But so far that seems to be blending out really nicely. It's a lot lighter than the swatch kind of makes it look. Like you can apply it with a light hand, even though it packs a lot of pigment. And then I'm just going to touch back into the crease shade we started with called Rope to just blend that at the edge, hopefully without making things look too muddy here. That did make things start to look a little bit muddy, but that's okay. I think by the time I get the rest of the shadows on, it'll just look like a nice blended crease and less like a muddy mess. Okay, now I'm going to take the other cream to powder shade, this one here, which is called Enigma, and I'm going to pack this one on right at the lash line and then start to bring it out toward the outer corner. Okay, and then I'm going to take a small blending brush and I'm going to blend around where I just place that color down to diffuse the edges a bit. I'm even going to dip back into that other more teal cream to powder shade and use that to blend the two together in the crease here. And then dipping back into the darker blue to go back and deepen up where I've lost depth. Okay, and now it's time for shimmers. So I think I'm going to take the more teal of the two shades, which is called Jubilee, and put that on the outer half of my eye, and then the more blue one, which is called Aqueous, on the inner half of my eye. And because of the way that these swatched, they swatched a little bit more sheer and just, I don't know, I'm a little concerned about the payoff on my lid. So I am going to go in with a glitter glue. This is the NYX glitter primer, and just put a really thin layer of that down before I go in with the shimmers, just to make sure we're getting the max payoff that we can. Okay, so starting with Jubilee on my finger here, and I'm just going to press that into the outer half. Really nice payoff this time. And then the shade Aqueous, I'm just going to put on the inner half. And then use my finger to kind of blend the line between the two. Same thing on the other eye, and then we will blend. I definitely got some fallout on this side, so even with the glitter glue, just be aware. And these shades are really pigmented, so they have like a pretty high likelihood of staining anywhere that they touch. Like my fingers are stained, even though I've used micellar water to remove those swatches. So just a word of caution about that. I'm gonna have to go back in and fix this in a minute. But before I do, I'm gonna take my smaller blending brush and I'm just going to dip back into the darker blue of the cream to powders to blend out the edge of Aqueous. And then the more teal of the cream to powders to blend out Jubilee. So for the bottom lash line, I kind of want to try out the other greens in the palette. So we have two cream to powders. One is called Lethal and one is called Royal. So this lighter one is called Lethal and then this deeper one is called Royal. So I think what I'm going to do is go in with Royal and then blend out with Lethal and just bring a little bit more green into the look. This cream to powder is definitely more green than the teal that I was using, but it's actually not vastly different. So I feel like in a look together, they actually will be pretty cohesive. Okay, just wiping off my brush, and then I'm going to go in with the shade Lethal, kind of around the edges. And this is definitely more of like a limey, mossy color. I think for the inner corner, I really want to try the one kind of true inner corner shade in this palette, which is called Queen. This one over here is the lightest and brightest option in the palette. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that for the inner corner. It's got a bit of like a peach reflect to it. And then once I've applied that on both sides, I can kind of start blending it into the blue a little bit to just soften up this inner corner. And then I think just as a final step for fun, I'm going to take this shade Orium, which is that gold that has a bit of a greeny bluey shift to it, and I'm going to press that through the center of my lids. And let's see if this just adds a little bit of extra sparkle. Yeah, I think that looks really cool. It's definitely more of like a fine glitter particle texture. I feel like I also want to put a little bit of that right on this inner corner portion of my lower lash line too. And it definitely picks up more on the green when layered over greens. Cool, so I've got a greeny, bluey, tealy kind of a look going. I think I'm gonna put some eyeliner in the waterline. And I might try this. This I got in an Ipsy recently. It's by Estate, and it looks like a really nice blue color winged liner. I'm not sure if it'll show up over this, but I haven't used it yet, so I'm gonna give it a shot. yeah, you can see that right at the lash line. And then maybe a little bit of a wing right where the blue and the green shadow meets. They are not perfectly even wings, but my eyes aren't even, so it is what it is. And then I almost want to pull a little bit of this down into the inner corner just for fun. And then I'll sharpen that up and also go into the waterline with this liner from Too Faced. It's the Killer Liner in Killer Sapphire. It's like a really nice, rich navy color. Okay, that eyeliner got a little messy, but to be honest, this whole look feels kind of messy to me. It's like grungy, mermaid kind of a vibe, so I'm just trying to go with it. So let's add some mascara. This is the Tarte Big Ego mascara. It's a tiny little baby one that I got in an Ipsy bag, and we're gonna see if it's any good because I need a big dramatic lash with this look. Okay, so here is the finished look. Definitely a fun, out there kind of playing with makeup moment for my first use of this palette. I have some initial thoughts after this first time dipping into the palette. I definitely still think that the cream to powder formula is not my favorite from Natasha Denona. Some of the shades work better than others. There's just something about that formula that is a little bit hard to work with. Sometimes it goes on really light in a really light wash. Sometimes it packs a lot of pigment. Sometimes I feel like it blends too far. Sometimes I feel like I can't get it to blend at all. And maybe it really is just a learning curve and playing with this palette more and getting to grips with that formula. In terms of fallout, I have a ton of fallout under my eyes right now, even with using the glitter primer. I can't be bothered to go in and properly clean it up because I'm about to take this makeup off anyway to go to the gym. So I'm just leaving it there, but maybe that's helpful for you to be able to see how much fallout I actually do have up underneath my eyes. It's a lot. And when I film videos like this, I typically do my foundation before coming on camera. But just as an FYI, I would do your eyeshadow first, clean up under your eye with some micellar water, and then do your foundation if you're going to be using this palette. At least with the shades that I've used today, the fallout situation is pretty bad. That being said, I do think that the lid shades, the way that they swatched did not look like it was going to have much of an impact, and the way that they look on my eyes definitely has an impact and a punch, and I'm getting lots of pigment. So yeah, it might just be a palette where the way that things swatch is a little tricky and the way that it looks on your eyes might be a little bit different. But those are just my first impressions. I will withhold my judgment on the palette as a whole until I've done a few more looks with you. So I will go ahead and pass you over to look number 2. Okay, so we are back for look number 2 with the Metropolis palette. The last look was fun, if a little bit experimental. So for today's look, I kind of want to tone it back down a bit and work with some of the more neutral shades in the palette. I'm kind of eyeing up this color here, which is almost like a taupey shade. It seems like it's the coolest shade in the palette neutrals wise. It's called Noble. But again, who knows how that's going to look on the lid, because the way these look in the pan, the way they swatch, and then the way they go onto the lid seem to be 3 very different colors. The most neutrally browns in this palette are pretty much all that cream to powder formula, so we will be working with cream to powders again. And I just want to go for something a little bit bronzy, a little bit smoky, but mostly wearable, because we've done the fun blues and greens, and now I want to see how I could pair this back for maybe like an everyday look or a date night look, something where I want to look pretty, I want to feel pretty, but maybe I don't want to go as colorful as last time. So that's the plan. We'll see how it turns out. I'm gonna zoom you in and we'll get started. Okay, so I think to start with, I'm gonna go in with the shade Pure, which is a cream to powder. It's this neutral-ish brown right here. and I'm going to use that as my initial transition shade. I feel like that's looking pretty good. Definitely warmer than it looks in the pan though. So again, with this palette, it's just kind of the way it seems to be going is things in the pan don't necessarily translate the same way on the lid. And of course that could be my undertone as well. That's making that appear a little bit more orangey and warm, but this is a pretty warm palette overall. I think for the outer corner, I'm just gonna go right next to that first shade that we used. This one here is called Antique, and it is also a cream to powder. I don't know how well you're gonna be able to actually see the texture on the brush there, but it literally does look like a cream. That's so interesting. And there is that pigment. So going in with a smaller brush and just trying to kind of keep this in the general area of where I want it. So far so good. I think those shades pair really well together. I'm just going to take a little bit of that first shade that we used and blend that edge out. But so far we are getting a nice kind of rusty brown look to the eye. While I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and put those two shades on the lower lash line. So starting with the darker and just meeting that up with the outer corner, and then just gently buffing a little bit of the lighter shade to blend that out. So again, with these cream to powders, it makes no sense to me because they are creams. So I don't really understand how I'm getting fallout. But I'm just noticing a little bit of fallout on my under eyes. I don't know how that's happening. Maybe it's my technique that's kind of flicking pigment without me really realizing, but yeah, just again, something I'm noticing, something to be aware of, and definitely not supposed to be happening, I don't think, with cream to powder shades because they're cream, but who knows? Maybe I'm just a very messy eyeshadow applier, which could well be the case. This might be a risk, but I kind of want to see what happens if I build on top of this with this shade here. It's more of a mustardy brown. That's the shade called Azoic, which is also a cream to powder. And I kind of just want to see if it can pull back some of the orange, because this is pulling very, very orange so far. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that and I'm going to use it almost like an eyeliner at first and just see if we can pull this look a little bit more neutral. There's nothing wrong with an orange look, but there's so many oranges in this palette that I already knew I was going to be doing an orange look for one of the looks in this video, but I did not anticipate this particular look being the orange one. So I do think that that helped. I think that that pulled back a little bit of the orange and just grounded the look a bit more and made everything a little bit more earthy. I think that's looking good so far. Things are blending really nicely. So now let's go in with the shimmer that I knew I wanted to use for sure. This is a metallic formula and it's called Noble. This one here. I'm going to carefully apply this again today just with my finger. So when I swatch it, it comes off more as like a greeny, dirty gold. Definitely looks more gold than it does in the pan, but I am going to try to carefully apply this with my finger. We'll see about the fallout situation. I'm not going to use the NYX glitter glue because I feel like I shouldn't have to with Natasha Denona shadows. So let's see how this applies. Okay, that's really pretty. I actually really love that shade. It reminds me a lot of the texture of the metallics in the Biba palette. Very smooth and soft, not overly shiny, which, you know, some people might not like, but I actually don't mind, especially for those looks where you don't want to look like you tried too hard. I feel like this gives that nice kind of just like hint of shine to the eye, but nothing overly sparkly. It's a really nice shade. It doesn't pull too green or too gold on my lids either. It definitely has a greeny gold undertone, but it almost looks more of like a mushroomy brown, which I actually really like. For my inner corner, I'm going to go in with the shade Queen again, which is this one here. It's the lightest in the palette. It's sort of like a champagne-y color with a little bit of a gold flip to it. And I'm just going to use a small brush to apply that. I'm going to give everything one last blend, but I think I'm actually going to stop there. Might be a boring look for some people, but in these 3 looks 1 palette videos, I always like to think about the person who maybe doesn't want to wear blue and green on their eyes all the time and see if I can do more of like a quote unquote wearable, everyday, neutral look. And I feel like this might be the most neutral look you're gonna get out of the Metropolis palette. I think you could probably put this shade Queen all over the lid for like a lighter, brighter, a little bit more minimal of a look and skip out on the kind of bronzy smudginess. But for like a date night or an event or something, I love how smudgy and bronzy and smoky and sexy that shade looks. So let me put some mascara on and then I will show you the final look. Okay, so here is the finished look number 2. I really like this look and I think overall I just had an easier experience putting this look together today. Much easier time working with the cream to powders today. I'm not sure if I learned my lesson from last time and I was just going in a little bit more carefully and trying to keep my blending at a minimum with those shades, or if the more browny shades in this palette are just an easier cream to powder to work with than the blue and green. And the fallout today was very minimal. I did have a little bit randomly, but overall it is not anything close to what I experienced with the first look that I did with this palette. Either way, if you have this palette or palettes with a similar color story and you're looking for some inspiration for looks, hopefully this gave you an idea of what you could do for kind of like a more neutral, everyday, or smoky date night look, depending on how much makeup you like to wear. This is the kind of makeup look that I could see myself wearing for sure on like a night out. Overall, I'm happy with this one. I think the shade on my lid, Noble, is definitely one of my favorite shades so far in the palette and definitely a contender for a really nice one and done without having to do all of that crease work, for just like a quick, easy, smoky, bronzy, mushroomy, brownie kind of a look. So yeah, that is look number 2, and I will pass you over now to the 3rd and final look. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the 3rd and final look with the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. I think today is the day that we delve into the oranges and reds in this palette, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of these shades look very similar in the pan, but if there's one thing that we've learned this video, it's that the way that the shadows look in the pan is not always how they translate on the eyes. So I think I'm gonna swatch a few things, figure out a game plan, and do a reddy orange eye look. So let me zoom you in and we will get started on the final look. Okay, so I did a little bit of swatching and you can see the nice gradient of oranges that we have going on here. Sorry, I had to move filming locations quickly, but I was basically just saying I'm gonna try to fit as many of these oranges as I can on my eye. So I think I'm gonna do a halo eye. So I'm gonna start with the lightest orange matte, which I believe is a cream to powder, and it's called Chrism. I need to zoom you in a little bit more. I'm gonna take that on a big fluffy brush and I'm just going to start putting that through my crease. So many cream to powders in this palette. It's like the ratio of cream to powders to the other types of shades, it has to be at least half. So because this is a cream to powder, I'm just picking up a little bit at a time and using a really fluffy brush to try to get a light wash. Okay, I'm now going to take this shade here, which is also a cream to powder, and it is called Stain. And I'm using that to start to create my halo shape on the inside and the outside of my lid. If you hear little birdies, by the way, I have my window open because the weather has finally warmed up a little bit. It was such a beautiful sunny day and I am trying to enjoy it even when I am inside. So if you hear little bird chirps, hopefully they are relaxing and pleasant to listen to. Okay, that's got us a nice halo shape started. So now I'm gonna dip into this shade here called Ripe, which is not a cream to powder, it's a CM, and I'm not sure what that means in Natasha Denona terminology, but I know CP is cream to powder, so this one is, it must just be a matte shadow. And I'm just gonna start using this to add depth on the kind of outer corner and inner corner of the halo shape. Then once I've got that built up, I'm gonna go back in with my fluffy brush and that first shade and just lightly blend the edges a little bit and connect the two sides in the middle. Okay, and now it is time for some shimmer. So I'm gonna start with this red shade at the bottom here called Claret, or is it Claret French? I'm not sure, but I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna put that on the outer edges of the inside lid space. So right at the start of where we put those mats down. And I'm using a brush for this because I want a really precise application, but I am not wetting my brush, nor am I using the NYX glitter primer. So we'll see. So far so good with getting the impact and shimmer on my lid with the brush. I like this shade. I used to be really into a red shimmer, and I still do like a red shimmer from time to time. Okay, I'm gonna try to fit 2 more shades. So I'm gonna take the shade Crest. Claret, by the way, was a metallic and Crest is also a metallic. So I'm going to take Crest here and just nestle that right next to the red to start to build that spotlight effect. And then if I feel like I've lost the red at all, I'll just go in and touch that back up. Okay, and then right down the middle, I'm gonna take this shade here called Helena. This one has a K next to it. Again, I'm not 100% sure what all of those markings mean, but this one does seem to have a little bit more of a sparkle to it than just the regular metallics. So I think it'll be really pretty right in the center of the eye to draw the light. And then I'm just using that as a kind of a diffusing shade and blending it into the other shades to give a nice gradient effect. I'm getting fallout for sure. As I did with the first look, the fallout this time seems to be pretty severe. So again, that's consistent with my experience with this palette. The fallout has been kind of a constant. For the bottom lash line, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take the red shade that we used before, and I'm going to put that on the inner and the outer part of my lower lash line. And then I'm going to take this shade up here called Rust, which is like a really bright orangey copper, and I'm going to put that in the middle on the lower lash line. I think we need a little inner corner brightening, so going back into this inner corner shade that I've used for all the looks called Queen, and I'm just dabbing that on the very inner corner. Okay, so this is the third look. I'm going to run and put mascara on, and then I'll be back to show you the look complete and give you my final thoughts after using this palette for 3 looks in this video. Okay, here's the look with just mascara, but I am gonna do some liner. I don't know, sometimes I feel like when I put reds and oranges really close to my eyes, it just doesn't look right without a liner, so I am just going to put some on, but I wanted to show you before I did that so you could see it with just mascara. I'm going to go in with a black liquid liner. This is the Tarte Double Take Awake. And here is the finished look number 3. So let's talk about my thoughts on this palette. First of all, I hope that if you have this palette, you could get something from this video. Maybe it's inspiration to go back and use this if you already have it in your collection, or ideas of looks using some different combinations of shades than you normally would. If you don't have this palette, however, and you are kind of heartbroken that you missed it because technically it is discontinued, Natasha Denona sometimes brings back discontinued palettes intermittently, but I haven't seen this one lately. So if you are sad that you missed out on this one, I can sort of give my thoughts in a way that I hope will de-influence you and make you feel better about not having this palette in your life, because that's how I felt. I felt really, really sad that I missed out on the hype of this one. I didn't even know who Natasha Denona was when this palette first launched, so I definitely missed the hype around it. And by the time I kind of was getting into Natasha Denona palettes, this was nowhere to be found. I ended up getting this through a friend when Natasha Denona was discontinued from Sephora Canada, and all the Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes on the Canadian Sephora website were like 50% off. And my lovely friend Leslie picked it up for me, and I ended up getting this at a good price, and I was just so excited to receive this palette because since discovering Natasha Denona, I had heard nothing but good things about this palette, and it was just a color story that I really, really wanted. Now, having the palette, I think I'm a little bit disappointed. The shades are kind of tough to work with, and for the price point of the palette and for the clout of Natasha Denona, I don't think they should be as hard to work with as they are. You all saw me struggling with things like fallout, which is not an issue that I ever have typically with most of my eyeshadows, even from really affordable cheap brands like BH Cosmetics, Beauty Bay, ColourPop. But the main thing, I think, if you don't have this palette and you've been bummed out that you don't have this palette, is the color story. For me, the color story was what really sold me on this palette, and I just assumed that the quality would be good. I've told you my issues with the quality, but also the color story, I just don't find it to be that unique. I feel sure that you have 1 to 2 palettes in your collection that have warm tone shadows in them, whether they are golds, oranges, warm browns, or a combination of those shades. Maybe you don't have a palette with blues and greens, and that's what is catching your eye in this palette. But if you don't have a palette with blues and greens already, how much are you going to get use out of blues and greens? Do you know what I'm saying? So all of that to say, I hope that you will not be heartbroken that you don't have this particular palette, and look around your collection and see if there's things that you can use that have a similar color story. Maybe you can create similar looks from the ones that you've seen using this palette. Is it a nice to have? Yes, and I feel like I'm the type of person that I always would have had the curiosity to try this palette just because I was so captivated and obsessed with it. And so I'm glad that I have it now and it's sort of broken the spell, but learn from my experience. You know, if this comes back as a re-release, or if you see people on resale sites like eBay and Depop and Mercari selling this for exorbitant amounts, like I've seen, you know, $250+ for this palette, I hope that you will not feel compelled to buy this palette at those prices. Based on my experience, I would not say that it's worth it. But that being said, I did have fun playing with makeup and doing these 3 looks. Thank you so much to everyone who voted in the poll that you wanted to see this palette. Let me know in the comments down below if there is another palette, Natasha Denona or otherwise, that you would like to see me do 3 looks with in my next 3 looks 1 palette video. These types of videos are always fun to stretch my creativity and see how much realistic variation a palette has. That is one thing that I think this palette does have going for it. is it's got a good variety of different types of shades, but they're all very, very warm tone. So like I said, if you're not a warm tone fan, definitely not the palette for you. If you'd like to see more content from me using palettes and makeup that I already have in my collection, make sure you subscribe before you leave and give the video a like if you like these types of videos. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will hope to see you in my next video. Bye!